We'll resume now. Thank you for coming back after prayers. We don't have too much time left, so we'll need to speed up. We're joined by Jeremy Corbyn MP, just joined us a little while ago. Please come to the front, Jeremy. Our next speaker now is Muazzam Beg. Muazzam Beg, most of you will know, he's well known because he was in Guantanamo Bay. Held there for a number of years. He's also responsible for the cage prisoners, and he currently serves as the director of cage prisoners. Muazzam Beg will now talk about the situation in cage prisoners, how they've succeeded and had good examples through alliance building and campaigns, how they're working to help those detained illegally. So Muazzam Beg will now speak to you for the next few minutes. Muazzam Beg.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Brothers and sisters and friends, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you look at the front of the effective lobbying and campaigning pack, you'll see the quote of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He says, "Okay, you've convinced me, now go out there and bring pressure on me." The first introduction I had to campaigning was by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by my own father, who had begun this campaign as simply an individual who was fighting for the rights of his son, who he saw through the pictures and the images that pervaded the world's screens of men in orange suits kneeling with shackles and hoods over their heads made to look like the extraterrestrial beings that you were told we were. And his call was very simple. He said, if my son has committed a crime, take him to court, charge him and punish him. But if he hasn't, he's not the criminal, you are. And thus, for me, when I returned, I saw the footage on videos, on newspaper clippings, and most importantly, from testimony of people from all around the country and later around the world. Wherever I would go, I found that my father preceded me. He had been there already, he'd done the job, and had started speaking. And he had no training officially. He had no explanation of how to deal with governments, the most powerful governments in the world. All he knew that an injustice was taking place against his loved one, and that he left no stone unturned in order to try to fight and find justice. One of the things he did, he told me once, is that he got the address of every MP in this country, and he wrote to every single one of them the same letter, asking them to fight for, to call for justice in my case, for me to be returned, because the United States was not able to offer a free and transparent trial. This for me became a very strong cornerstone, because it was a personal experience. But then I saw, as a result of that, one man's strength and one man's ability, one man's courage and devotion, leading to other people finding strength in him. Now, I'm going to give you two little examples, very vast and diverse ones. He told me that he went to New York and he met with several people, including some people who survived from the terrible 9/11 attacks. One lady came over to him whose daughter had died in the 9/11 attack, and gave him this necklace, and on the necklace was written the words hope. And she said to him, please give this necklace to Muazzam Beg's daughter. And she did. And she saw in that action hope. When I was released from Guantanamo Bay, I went to the office of my lawyer Gareth Pierce, and there I bumped into a person who you may have heard of recently, Abu Qatada. And Abu Qatada had been released for a short amount of time because prior to that he'd been detained in this country without charge for 3 years in Britain's own Guantanamo. And he came over and he said, he kissed my forehead, and he said, that's not for you, that's for your father. Why? Because he said, even people like us who have been demonized to every single level, that man gave us hope. And why I gave you this example is to show you that right from across, whether it's from the people affected by 9/11 or those accused of instigating 9/11. This was across the board, that somebody saw that a simple call for justice, a simple call by a man in the wilderness standing up against the nations of the world, was something that inspired across the board. A couple of weeks ago, I met with Julian Assange, who you must have all heard of, who's trying to fight extradition to the United States. And he interviewed me about some issues that are hurting him and that he's worried about, and also about the work of cage prisons and so forth. And in that moment of meeting Julian Assange, I remember that the one thing that we all had in common was that we all had the same lawyer, Gareth Peirce. In fact, I remember Gareth, when I met her in 1998, she told me that at first it was the turn of the Irish, and for many years it had been the Irish who had been the demonized, criminalized community. And she said, "You're next," meaning not just me, but the whole community. And she was right. What a premonition from over 2 decades ago. And what I learned from meeting with Julian Assange is that he was somebody, I told him that he made me famous and he made me infamous. He gave me credibility and he took it away from me too. He released the WikiLeaks about me and the work that I was doing with cage prisoners, in which he quoted the US ambassador to Luxembourg saying that, basically praising the work that I was doing in calling for the return or the repatriation of prisoners in Guantanamo who are unable to return to their homes for fear of torture, like, for example, the Syrians or the Palestinians, or at that time the Egyptians and the Tunisians and the Libyans. And I said that if I have an American ambassador praising me, that really does a lot of, give me a bad image. So I said that he helped to break my image. But on a serious note, it is precisely this sort of fearless campaigning that I want to make the point. I wanted to talk about making alliances, which is extremely important. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Allah says that come together and work together, cooperate on goodness and piety, and do not cooperate on sin and transgression. So we've got 2 aspects here to work on, that we should cooperate with people when they are working on something that is good and has piety in it. But we should not cooperate. We refuse to cooperate. We refuse to bow down when somebody is going to transgress against us. And that for me has been the essence of the work of that we do in Cage Prisoners. We are called a controversial group. We don't court controversy, but by its very nature, our makeup is controversial. What we do today, standing up for the rights of the people who it is said of them that they are the world's most dangerous terrorists, that they are a threat to national security, they are a threat to everything that exists. We stand up for their rights simply because of this, that prior to this, we as a Muslim community in this country didn't know about standing up for anyone's rights. Certainly, we would not have stood up for the rights of those people who are standing up for us today. But in doing this act, in this reciprocation that we hope we will learn from, we hope that people from the other communities who stood for us, who had no real reason, certainly not a religious reason to stand up for us, that they will take heed and understanding from us, that inshallah we as Muslims know that it is our duty to stand up for them when they're being oppressed. And time will be the test of that, and our colours will show, inshallah. I pray that that doesn't happen when the next community becomes targeted. It's also important that when we're talking about building alliances, we look at these different groups of individuals, and I can quote to you some from my own work, and they range from whether it's MPs and government ministers to organizations that have been fighting for human rights on things that we disagree with fundamentally, but we stand together on certain principles that we know are across the board. And in this cooperation, there may be aspects that are unpalatable sometimes to us. And this is sometimes where it comes to the issue that I know people don't like the word compromise, but sometimes that's precisely what you have to do in order to get your voice heard properly. On key principles, however, it is important that you stand firm, even if they accuse you of being somebody dangerous and a terrorist and all sorts of things. As a community, we're all called either sympathizers of terrorism, supporters of terrorism, incubators of terrorism, donkeys of terrorism. It doesn't really matter. I think also that when we are looking at the issue about groups that have existed before in the past, it is important for us to take lessons. If I was able to, I would send from every major city where there are groups and individuals and communities of Muslims, I would send them to Northern Ireland. I would send them to go and meet with people from both communities there who had fought and struggled and continue to do so. And by the way, the greatest threat of terrorism that's ever faced this country and continues to do so isn't from the Muslims. It is not. It has been in the region of the north of Ireland for all sorts of reasons. 3,000 people died in that conflict during the Troubles. As late as 1998, 28 people were killed in a bombing in Omagh. Yet you couldn't detain anybody without charge or trial for years on end. You couldn't convict somebody for writing poetry or publishing a book. You couldn't hold people for more than 7 days without charge or trial. And although they had internment that was turned out or recognized to be unconstitutional, yet now what do we have? A series of laws the likes of which Britain has never seen. The land of habeas corpus, which says that we can detain you at our whim, whether it's directly here or through proxy in other countries or by rendition, as we've seen least recently. And this is another important alliance that we should make across the board with different groups of Muslim people across the world, because one of the things I think that is not understood, for as we indeed are born and bred British citizens, and we have the equal rights to any other citizen, we are also citizens of the Ummah. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنَّ هَذِي أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَأَنَا رَبُّكُمْ فَاتَّقُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this nation of yours is one nation and I am your Lord, so fear me. And our relationship with that nation is felt every time there is a Syria, there is a Palestine, there is a Libya. And in particular, what's really disgusting is when you find our own government has been involved in rendition cases of people who ironically end up leading the government, for example in Libya, the case of Sheikh Abdul Hakim Bilhaj and others. So it is important that we build our alliances based upon things that we know are to be correct, that we build them with groups across the board. My father, as a child, sent me to a Jewish school, understanding this concept a long time ago. Not that he supported Zionism or anything like that. He sent me there because he saw things that were practical. Their beliefs in Tawheed are stronger than those of Trinitarians, for example. Their dietary rules are similar to our own. So he understood things that later for me went on to become something that you would not expect. You would not expect that somebody who is a terrorism suspect has friends that are Jews. You would not expect that somebody who is accused of being a Taliban supporter as working in their office a non-Muslim American Jewish girl. All of these things we don't do in order to respond to what they're saying, but we do it based upon merit and inshallah as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, at-ta'awun al-birri wa-taqwa wa jazakum al-khair wa barakallahu feekum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Muazzam Bey. Some very practical lessons in alliance building and campaigning. The next speaker is someone who I traveled to Sudan as part of a delegation. It's Aisha Alvi. Aisha Alvi, some of you may have read about her in the press some years ago when she went to school. She was banned from wearing the headscarf, and then she challenged the school. Along with the sister, she won the case, and legally she won the case and she was able to wear the scarf. She's also a barrister at Holborn Chambers in London. She recently moved to Manchester, and today she's come literally a few hours ago to join our program. She has a master's in Islamic law. She also specializes in Islamic inheritance, and there are much more to say about Aisha, but I'll shorten it here. And she'll now speak about fighting for your rights when you know it's right. Aisha, over here.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I'm going to give a little bit of background basically to the hijab fiasco that took place back in 1989-90. It's always difficult to speak about this issue because I've spoken about it so many times before and I don't want to sound like I'm repeating myself. But because I've been specifically asked to talk about the lobbying side, I'm going to talk a little bit to you today about how we actually won our campaign and what really was key in winning that campaign. So back in 1989-90, my sister Fatima Alvi and I won the right to wear the Islamic headscarf, alhamdulillah, at Altrincham Grammar School for Girls in Cheshire, just outside Manchester. We were suspended after 2 long years of persuasion between the school and ourselves when the persuasion tactics completely broke down. In December 1989, without the support of our parents, we went to the school and we refused to move our headscarves. At the time, we were warned by leading members of the Manchester Muslim community, Manchester Council of Mosques and many others that we would not win. And the right for other Muslim girls to wear the scarf would be jeopardised and we needed to back down. We were told we were in a girls' school, covering is unnecessary. We would not have any other school to attend and would most probably be expelled from the school. The ultimate pressure came one day at UMIST. It was Christmas. University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology were holding an Islamic week, where we held a roundtable discussion with Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who's a well-known leading scholar from Qatar. He happened to be in the country. We put the matter to Yusuf al-Qaradawi at the time. And Yusuf al-Qaradawi told us in no uncertain terms that we should back down and it's not necessary for us to wear the Islamic headscarf in school under the circumstances. However, for us personally, it was not just our Islamic rights that were being challenged. Our rights as British Muslims were being challenged. Interesting at that time, etched in the memory of the local Muslim community and national community was the unsuccessful banning of the satanic verses, the Salman Rushdie affair. So people were frightened, the Muslim community were frightened. They didn't want to see another fiasco. The school did not want to stand out for the wrong reasons. Other girls in the school weren't sure whether to show solidarity by donning a scarf in support. On the other hand, were they supposed to get involved? There were just a handful of girls, 7 or 8 of them. No one knew at that time where was the headscarf row heading. So was this going to be a legal battle? Was this going to be worse than the Salman Rushdie affair? Was this, and this was something that at the time, if people do remember somebody called Kaleem Siddiqui, the late Kaleem Siddiqui from the Muslim Parliament, he was quoted in the press as saying this will be worse than the Salman Rushdie affair unless the school backed down. Was there going to be a compromise? And would the compromise be, for example, the scarves could be worn in all classrooms where teaching was going on, but maybe not in PE lessons or in science lessons? What we found actually was this was an out-of-court battle which was won by the media. The very effective lobbying and campaigning we did as a family and indeed as a local community won us the right to wear the Islamic headscarf, which set a precedent for all other Muslim girls up and down the country, across the UK back in 1990. That's well over 20 years ago. Being the first case of its kind in Britain, the headscarf row, as it was called at the time, hit the headlines. One of the finest grammar schools in the country, in a conservative stronghold, and under a conservative government, was in the limelight for the wrong reasons. Not for its academic brilliance, but for being intolerant towards 2 Muslim girls. The campaign was handled with great thought and calculation by our family. We did not just jump at the chance of speaking to the press. Ironically, in the beginning, we refused to engage with the press in case it damaged the outcome of our case. The out-of-print Sunday Correspondent newspaper was the first to report about our case. A small article which was given by Sahid Mustaqim Bleher, who was chairman of the Islamic Party of Britain at the time. The press jumped on this very short, small piece, and they were desperate for the story. It was only when we found that the school had been speaking to the press then that we thought it was time that we also spoke to the press. The school were claiming that we were deliberately staying away from school, so this was high time. It was high time we came out and spoke up. From nowhere, there was national and international media interest. My late father, Allah yarhamah, as unhappy as he was at this point, was forced to get legal advice. Fatima, my sister, wrote a very strong letter addressed to the governing body about the whole issue, complaining that the headmistress had said to her and to both of us, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." Obviously a very inappropriate comment for a headmistress to be making. The Commission for Racial Equality were involved. By this stage, the press had located where we lived. They were camping literally outside our house. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. With the help of our older siblings, we took the press on. We did not shy away. We answered the questions they posed. We invited them in to our home. Our home was open. The press had an insight into who we were as individuals and who we were as a family. And they liked what they saw, basically. They realized that we were two independent Muslim girls who believed in our faith wholeheartedly and wanted to educate ourselves whilst practicing our faith. The media campaign was only over a very short period of time, a 4 to 6 week period, which made it extremely intense. It wasn't long and drawn out. The days did seem long and drawn out though. Our routine was arriving at school each morning, greeted by the press and photographers, only to be turned away by the school on arrival. This would happen on a daily basis. We would wait then for a parent or an elder to come and collect us. Locally, nationally and internationally, the issue of school uniforms was being discussed. So this was no longer just a religious issue, this was an issue about school uniform and what people should wear and whether school rules should be abided by. Were we flouting the school rules? Were we challenging the authorities? Was this a publicity stunt? Some of the headlines read, "Heads they win, tails they lose," for example. This became a great opportunity for all those Islamophobes to surface, to voice an opinion. One in particular, well-known racist, Ray Hungerford at the time, who was expelled from a Bradford school. He was a headmaster, believe it or not, of a school that had a majority Pakistani origin students. And he came out and spoke up against the headscarf affair. From The Guardian, to The Times, to The Independent, they were leading the story, as well as children's news round. The tabloid press suddenly became extremely interested. The Today newspaper did a centre feature on our family background and amusingly took a picture of our home stating the value. The story was unusual because our late father was a well-known consultant ophthalmologist who came across as a very reasonable, kind, amiable man in the press. Yes, a man with a beard, but very kind and non-political. With a large family, 7 children, originating from Pakistan, but yet living in one of the nicest parts of Cheshire. It was an unusual story. It didn't make sense to the press. It wasn't quite the story the press had seen before. The Guardian then printed a lengthy article about my sister Fatima because they spoke to her at length. She was just 1 year older to me, and they praised how articulate she was, of this 15-year-old, and how she knew her rights and how she knew her own mind. Another turning point was when the Sun newspaper led on the Lady Diana visiting an Islamic centre in Stanmore at the time, removing her shoes, donning a black headscarf and wearing a short skirt. Parallels were drawn, and it was also seen to be a controversial act, whilst the headscarf row was in full fling. So very much in the press, it was seen that Lady Diana actually supported us on this issue. We found radio stations of people arguing for and against, up and down the country. Friends at school were falling out over the issue. Islam, remember, at that time was some sort of novelty in Britain. Further parallels were being drawn with the row in France that had taken place just the year before, and whether that was our inspiration, and that's why we're acting in this way. The press became familiar with us. They were keen to report positively and wanted common sense to prevail, as they often reported. Their campaign and positive reporting forced the school, I believe, to back down. The school realised the issue had become big. This was no longer a local issue, but one of international importance, with everyone waiting with bated breath to see the outcome. We were also selective, though, in how far we would go. There was one story that the press could have run with, for example. Fatima, my sister, was isolated by the headmistress in a small classroom next to the headmistress's office all day and without lunch. She was given one banana that day and wasn't allowed to go for lunch. So again, we were very sensitive about what we actually told the press and what we didn't. We felt that it could get out of hand. The Iranian press, for example, wanted more on this particular story about Fatima being isolated in this room and wanted pictures of us praying. We decided at that point against this. We did not want an Iranian fatwa against the school at that time. Instead, we ensured that they filmed us studying at home and talking about concern for our education. That's what the focus of our issue was. Finally, alhamdulillah, mid-January, under the eyes of the world press, the governing body of the school convened an emergency meeting, something they had previously refused to do, calling this a minor issue that should go away, and announced at a press conference that we would be allowed back to school. I cried tears of joy, scenes of our father hugging us, again positive images were flashed on television screens, something often unusual, Muslim fathers hugging their daughters. The reporting was happy. The front page of the Times pictured us both very, very happy at the result. I can probably only recall one particular journalist, actually, who did not support us, which was reflected in his report on TVAM, which was the morning show the following morning. For me, in conclusion, the press saw a family, a father with 7 children, mother out of the country, with 5 daughters, some donned the hijab, some who didn't. They found that we weren't politically motivated, but truly wanted to follow our faith. We came across as reasonable, and we showed that we had been trying to be as cooperative with the school as possible and had tried to work with the school. The positivity of the journalism that was reflected in the supportive letters we received. Yes, there was hate mail, lots of it, but most of it was, at that time, was just laughable. Things like, oh, we didn't fight in the war for people like you to come to our country and ruin our green and pleasant land. So there's all kinds of hate mail too. Alhamdulillah, we had won. We could go back to school and get on with our lives. The Muslim community, our peers, the school, people were reassured once again that Britain was a tolerant country. Indeed, even many years later, for example, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office saw the story to be very positive, that Muslims face difficulties in Britain, but we overcome them. They in fact produced 2 videos in 1999 called Muslims in Britain, promoting our story. And this video was actually a promotion of Muslims in Britain and sent to Muslim countries worldwide. This was another form of lobbying by the Foreign Office about Muslims living in Britain. And finally, just to say, if one family and a community could achieve this back in 1989, 90, 20 years ago, when Islam was not prominent, then let's go on to achieve, lobby and campaign for much more, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Aisha Alvi, for a very personal account. Indeed, it is our motivation for all of us. We have a couple of apologies. I mentioned in the beginning that Sajjad Karim MEP is unable to join us today due to engagement in Parliament. We're hoping he sent videos to us to share with you. That hasn't come through, unfortunately, yet. We also just received a message from Amanda Thomas Johnson from FOSIS. He's unable to join us also because he's caught up in the journey. He will make it on time, unfortunately. Which leaves us with our final speaker. It's Jeremy Corbyn, MP for, let me get this right, MP for Islington North and the lifelong campaigner against racism and injustice. He is the Vice Chair of All Party Human Rights Group, Chair of Chargos APPG, Parliamentary CND Group, and a member of the London Select Committee. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very, very much for inviting me along this evening, and I think we're finishing in 30 minutes, aren't we? No, we had a discussion beforehand about how long I could speak for. Don't worry, I'm not It's all right, I'm not going to speak for 30 minutes. There's got to be questions and discussion, at least I hope there are. It's a real honour to be invited here, and I'm very pleased I was able to come along, and it's great to share a platform with Mozam Beg and Aisha. Mozam, if ever I meet people who come in my office who've got a real problem, and we go through some apparently very, very complex issue of human rights, discrimination, overarching powers of the state and so on, and I eventually say, stop, who's your solicitor? And they say, Gareth Peirce. I said, okay, we're halfway there. We're halfway to a solution already if Gareth's your solicitor. And so I think in all our work we should just pause for a second and just think of the incredible work on human rights and anti-terror laws and iconic issues that have changed law in this country that's been done by very brave lawyers, one of which is Gareth Peirce, but there are many others as well. And we just think of the way they've been prepared to stick their necks out and try and make a difference. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about lobbying and issues surrounding that, but I just wanted to start by saying thank you for producing this magazine, Arches Quarterly, because it's challenging a lot of the narratives of history. And the article in here that I'm really taken with is the one by Katrina Robertson, who's in the audience, I hear. Well done. What did the Moors do for us? Retelling our European stories, renegotiating our heritage. Because there's something quite therapeutic about hearing the most appalling, naive, xenophobic, nasty comments that one gets of a racist nature in Spain towards Arab peoples, towards the Arabic language, towards Islam, and then look at the beauty of Cordoba, look at the beauty of Granada, and look at the way in which the whole Spanish tourist industry thrives off the Islamic heritage of the country. And so it's a question of understanding our own history and our own past. And if I could change one thing in our society, what I would really want to do is change the teaching of history in our schools. Too many of our children are brought up on some curious notion that the entire motivation for the British Empire was to spread some sort of liberal democracy all around the world. There wasn't a thought for taking resources, there wasn't a thought for dominating people, there wasn't a thought for making money, and certainly perished the idea that there was ever an idea of a slave trade or anything like that. Goodness no. We were always about building railways, providing schools, and making the world a better place. Well, please, let's just look at the history of all empires, do that kind of thing. And so I would want to change very much the teaching of history. Now, I'm an activist who became an MP, but I never stopped being an activist, and that's probably my mistake, actually. And what I want to do is try and impart to you something of the ideas of the life of an MP and the pressures that are put on, and how you, as people who want to change things and have very effectively already changed things in a number of cases, can undertake that lobbying. I represent Islington North, and I've represented it for a very long time, and I'm very proud to represent Islington North. It's an incredibly diverse community. There are probably 70 different languages spoken. There are people from probably 80 to 100 different countries living there. There are people of every faith and no faith. And there are people with a huge diversity of views. And it is my job to represent them, and I'm very proud to be able to do that. And the danger of any person who's elected to public life is you respond to those that get through to you, you respond to those that are articulate, you respond to those that put their case in the easiest way. Parliament is absolutely full of highly articulate, very well paid, very well resourced, very well informed commercial lobbyists. They know exactly how to lobby an MP. If it's a question of promoting what I would see as some awful weapon by a armaments manufacturing company, they're not going to go to an MP and say, we've developed this fantastic bomb, it only costs $500 and each one can kill 1,000 people. How many do you think this country should buy? They're not going to say that. No. They're going to say, Mr. Corbyn, have you ever considered the loss of employment in your community if this company wasn't able to develop this particular thing, which is all about our defence? It's never about attack, it's always about defence. I mean, that's one example. Next thing would be, I remember when the government of Britain finally conceded that lead in petrol was damaging to children's health, was damaging to the brains of all of us, and was extremely dangerous for everybody. It was an additive in fuels. And there was a lot of research for a very long time to show that A, it was unnecessary, and B, it was very, very dangerous. It was unnecessary for the performance of the engines, and it was very, very dangerous. And the companies that put the lead additive in the fuel spent a phenomenal amount of time and money lobbying MPs to say that all this stuff about lead in the brains, it didn't really do you any harm at all. It was okay, it was just a gross exaggeration, it was really all right. And that cars couldn't operate properly without it. And they went on and on with this thing, continually challenging what was overwhelming scientific evidence. And then, of course, in the constituencies where this fuel additive was manufactured or added in the oil refineries, they lobbied very hard at the MPs. And almost irrespective of party, a debate takes place in Parliament, the MPs representing oil refining constituencies on one side, the rest of the planet on the other. Eventually, the government was forced to give in, was forced to ban the additive of lead in petrol. Initially, it was a choice of lead-free, and then it was pretty well banned altogether. And the health effects very quickly became quite apparent as a result of that. That was a case of a long-standing campaign by some very brave people who were prepared to stand up against the power of commercial lobbying. And so I just want you to be aware of the very powerful commercial lobbying that goes on the whole time in Parliament and the corruption that goes with it. In this excellent guide that has been produced, Effective Lobbying and Campaigning, it's unmasked a number of former colleagues of mine. Note they're all former colleagues of mine who've had problems of offering to lobby on behalf of companies and claiming they have a hotline to the Prime Minister, to senior civil servants, to all kinds of people in order to affect government policy. Their mistake was bragging about it. The clever lobbyists don't go around bragging about it, they just quietly go about their business. But for all the work that we do on human rights lobbying, on peace lobbying, on the rights of cultural identity, all those kind of things, there are hundreds of very well informed, very well resourced commercial lobbyists that are going on in Parliament all the time. And the campaign, which I strongly support, for an open public register of all lobbyists, as well as diary recording of any MPs that meet these commercial lobbyists, is, I think, part of having an open, accountable democracy. And so that is part of the issue that we have to address. The other point I just want to make is on the political campaign lobbying that we have to do and how we're effective about it. I was first elected to Parliament in 1983. So I've been there a very long time because the people of Islington North are very kind, and I'm grateful for all the support I've had, and I mean that very genuinely because sometimes that support has been absolutely crucial. My constituency, then as now, has a very large number of Irish people living in it. At that time, a law called the Prevention of Terrorism Act was in operation. The Prevention of Terrorism Act came in 1974 after the pub bombings in Birmingham and Guildford. In fact, after the Birmingham pub bombing, and the first ever person arrested under the Prevention of Terrorism Act was Paul Hill, a young Irish man who lived in my constituency. And he was accused of mass murder. No two ways about it. And he was sentenced to indeterminate lifetime imprisonment, as were the other three of the Guildford Four. And if you're about to tell me to stop, I'll stop soon, okay. I see him tearing paper up. Just very quickly on the narrative of anti-terror legislation. His family came to see me, explained the whole case to me. I listened very carefully to what they had to say. I read all the papers they gave me about it, discussed it at length with them, went to see Paul in prison, who was deeply depressed, didn't really want to see me or anybody else for that matter, and he told me a bit later on, other visits told me much more about his treatment in prison. He was moved to prisons 74 times during the time he was in prison. Interestingly, the moves usually took place the day before any of us were due to visit him, because it was a way of messing up our visiting arrangements. Anyway, the PTA arrested him, got a confession out of him, and sentenced him on the basis that he had no legal representation and he could be imprisoned on the basis of hearsay evidence and on the basis of confessions. We won the case, and eventually 18 years later he was released. The Home Secretary said on 84 occasions in Parliament he is guilty and will stay in prison for the rest of his life. On one occasion he finally admitted that we'd won the case for the retrial. The retrial had been successful, and Paul was, along with the others, was eventually released. That changed law. It took very, very brave campaigning by his family and all the supporters of the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6 to bring about that change in law. I voted against the Prevention of Terrorism Act on every possible occasion, not because I'm in favour of terrorism, not because I'm in favour of people dropping bombs, not because I'm in favour of killing people. I'm not on any of those things. But if there's a charge against somebody, bring it out in court as a criminal offence and put them on trial, and let's hear the evidence and decide one way or the other. 2001 came. New anti-terror legislation came in, which allowed executive detention, which condoned, in reality, what the US was doing in Guantanamo Bay, and all that whole process of executive detention, because that's what it is. And I, along with many others, campaigned against it. It's not easy speaking up on those issues. You know that, because you know many of the people who are victims of that. Mosam is obviously a victim of that, but there are many, many others who've just been stopped and searched and held for a short time, accused perhaps and then released. But there are many, many people who've suffered. And we now have a new problem coming up with the green paper that's come out on justice and security, which again goes back into the whole realms of executive detention, and the new attack that's taking place against the European Court of Human Rights and diminishing the European Convention on Human Rights. And David Cameron has come up with this bizarre position that cases should only go to the European Court of Human Rights that I think that he thinks ought to go to the European Court of Human Rights, and everything else should be decided by national courts. The point of a treaty, the point of a convention, is that you do give up some of your sovereignty because you accept a different law, you accept an international law, you accept an international standard. If it applies to us and it's uncomfortable, think how uncomfortable it is and how important it is for those governments that are harassing Roma people in Hungary or all of the Central European countries, those that are suffering that degree of racism. So lobbying is important. Now, how do you go about it? Lobbying me to oppose anti-terror laws and stand up for human rights is very easy. You've just got to come and tell me about it and I'll vote against it. It's not a problem. And it wouldn't be very surprising and it wouldn't make a huge amount of difference. But if you put together a very unusual coalition of people, David Davis saying he's against anti-terror laws along with me and John McDonnell and Tony Benn, well, that's interesting. That's different. And so you've got to remember to get through to everybody and try and convince them of it. And the last point I make, because I've been told to stop, and I want to stop, is this. MPs are incredibly busy people under lots of pressure, lots of issues of time. When you lobby them, lobby at their level, research well in advance what they're capable of doing and what they're not likely to be able to do, and try and get their support at some level to a particular issue and a particular campaign. And that way we can make a huge amount of progress, because I've seen the way Parliament operates and all the frustrations that operate within Parliament, but for all that, it is an opportunity to make things public. It is an opportunity to say things on the record where the MP concerned can't be done for libel. And going back to the Guildford and Birmingham issues, we had a crucial debate in the late 1980s when we put a whole lot of stuff on the record about the way the police had behaved towards those people. That made a difference and helped to promote the whole cause. And so being involved in the political process is the most hard-working, frustrating thing in the world, but it's also some of the most important things in the world, because if we walk by on the other side, anti-terror legislation goes through, people are arrested without charge, without trial, convicted in secret courts, and we never hear or see of them again. That is what is so wrong within our society, and that is what is so wrong in so many parts of the world. So standing up for human rights is what I believe very strongly in, and I know exactly what the Cordova Foundation say on this issue, and I'm very pleased to be able to be here tonight and support the cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy Corbyn, and sorry to rush you again. We will finish by 8:45, hopefully. We'll take from now about 10 minutes for any questions you may have, any comments. We have 2 roaming mics, so if you have questions, put your hands up, please.